of the strongest pieces of evidence for the resurrection of Jesus is the changed lives of the apostles. We'll see that Jesus, from history, we know Jesus lived and he died by crucifixion, and that later, after his death, his tomb was empty. And we can see that his followers begin almost immediately going around telling people that they experienced Jesus after his death, that Jesus had appeared to them, resurrected, alive again, that they had interacted with him. And they were so impacted by these experiences that they had that they ended up going on to lead lives that were completely devoted to the cause of Jesus. They spent the rest of their lives telling people their experiences with Jesus' life, the fact that they'd seen him come back from the dead. And they did this in the face of pretty severe persecution. Some of these people were persecuted not just culturally, but by the government itself, some even to death. But they never recanted these claims. They're so moved by whatever they experienced that they were willing to be persecuted, even die for their beliefs. This is not something that somebody told them, hey, you should be a Christian, and now they've got to decide, are they going to die for this belief or not? They're the ones who start these Christian claims, but they're so convinced of their truth that they really experienced Jesus after his death that they're willing to die. It's a remarkable, almost miraculous thing to see. And there's numerous people who are like this, including people who were not even followers of Jesus during his life, but said that they experienced him after his death. They had seen him alive after he was dead, and that this radically changed their life, including Jesus' brother, James, and the Apostle Paul. So we've got to explain this. If the claim is, I see secular skeptics will say, well, Jesus didn't really come back from the dead. People just said that. Well, if we're going to say that that's true, Jesus didn't really come back from the dead. Well, we've got to explain what happened to the apostles. They've clearly experienced something that is so real to them that they're willing to die for what they believe they truly experienced. Now, I will see sometimes that people will take this tack, they'll try to psychoanalyze the apostles. They'll try to say things like, well, they're so emotionally distraught by Jesus' death, and that they were in the perfect emotional state to experience things like hallucinations, or to start to believe things that weren't true, but they wanted them to be true so bad that they just sort of convinced themselves that Jesus had come back from the dead, even though it was not a real event. Now, there's some problems with these kinds of theories, like the hallucination theory, problems in terms of we don't really have any evidence to suggest that a mass group of people could have a spontaneous hallucination, not to mention the fact that these people didn't always associate with one another, and they're claiming to see Jesus at different times. But setting that aside for a second, I want to talk about this attempt to psychoanalyze the apostles. Now, I have an interest in psychology, so I understand maybe some natural interest in the topic. I actually that was what I got my bachelor's degree in, was psychology. Now, I'm far from an expert, but I can see the appeal. I think there's something very enticing about thinking about psychology. What drives people? What motivates people? Why do people think one thing or another? I mean, that's what kind of interested me in the topic, and it's something that continues to interest me today, even though I don't engage in psychology professionally. But as much as it's interesting to us to think about these psychological topics, I think that we might overestimate our ability to psychoanalyze people in history, particularly based on how little we know about the apostles. I want you to think about this. If you were experiencing something's going on in your life, you decide, hey, I want to go for some counseling, I want to see a psychologist or a psychiatrist to help me deal with whatever it is that's going on in my life. Typically, these professionals are going to talk with you. They're going to meet with you, maybe over a course of many sessions, but they're going to talk with you, try to figure out what is going on with you, and then what is the best thing that they can do to, come up with some type of plan to help you. Do they need to give you some type of official diagnosis? What's going to go on? But the biggest thing that they need to do when they first meet you is to gather some information. They got to get to know you. But that's the problem with us and the apostles. We know some things about them. We know some of the things that they did that are recorded in history. And a lot of what they did, we know is recorded in the Bible. And then we see some things from outside the Bible, other ancient historical writings. But we see some of the things that they did, and occasionally it will tell you something about the way that they felt. You can definitely see that after Jesus is dead, after he's crucified, his closest followers are distraught. They are sad. But are these small little snippets in the historical record enough for us to really adequately psychoanalyze somebody? I think sometimes people will say with such confidence, like, oh, well, the disciples, they were so motivated by their sorrow that Jesus died that they probably just convinced themselves. They just believed something that wasn't true. And even though it was not true, they believed it so strongly that they were even willing to die for it. That's a huge claim to make. It assumes a lot of things about the apostles that we just don't know. The other problem I think I see is that you've got to get everybody to have some type of psychological condition. I don't mean like a disorder, but just to be in the right kind of state of mind that when Jesus dies, they all would be willing, or be primed, maybe is a better way to say it. They would all be primed to believe something that's not true. But believe it so strongly that they're willing to believe it, stay strong in the face of persecution. I think it would be hard for us to say that even one of the apostles was actually in the type of psychological state necessary for this kind of belief. But to say that a dozen people, we know that it's more than a dozen people who will go out in the early history and say that they saw Jesus after his death. But to say even an dozen people would all be in the right state of mind where they would all accept false beliefs that they ought to know are false, but accept them as true anyways, and then be willing to be persecuted for those same beliefs. This is a huge statement to make. I don't think it's a statement we should make so lightly. I think that I get the temptation to try to psychoanalyze the apostles, and hey, is it possible that their belief in Jesus was a purely psychological phenomenon, is all in their minds, their experience? I guess sure, it's possible, but to say that this is reasonable, I think we're going to need a little more reasons to say that this would actually be a reasonable belief. Just the fact that it's possible that they could have experienced some psychological phenomena is not the same as saying that they probably did. I don't think we know enough about these individuals. I think actually you'll see even in psychology today, people might struggle to fully understand what's going on with someone. Someone is experiencing some type of psychological trauma or issue. I think even a professional today might struggle. Hey, let's have some sessions. Let's try a couple different things, a couple different tacks to figure out how are we going to best categorize this person so we can know how to help them. Let alone somebody who lived 2,000 years ago, who we know only bits and pieces of. James, the brother of Jesus, we know very little about his life other than the fact that he didn't believe Jesus was God in Jesus' lifetime. He thought he was pretty crazy. And then after Jesus died, James experiences who he believes is the risen Jesus and becomes a leader in the early church willing to die for this belief. I think it's just a little bit too much for us to try to psychoanalyze the apostles. I think we just need to take a more reasonable approach and say that we probably do not know enough to make these kinds of claims against the apostles' experiences of the risen Jesus.